What if the stress you keep complaining about is actually something your brain is choosing, not consciously? You're not sitting there deciding to be anxious or overwhelmed, but underneath the surface, at the level of brain chemistry, survival wiring, and deeply grooved habit, your nervous system may have learned to prefer stress. Your brain starts to seek stress out. It recreates stress patterns even when they're not there, and you feel genuinely uncomfortable when the stress is gone. I know that sounds strange, maybe even insulting, but once you understand the mechanism, once you see why this happens and how it works, you won't just feel less crazy. You'll actually have a shot at breaking the pattern, because you can't fix something you don't understand. And to understand it, we need to start at the very beginning, not with your life, not with your habits, but with something buried much deeper. Something your brain inherited long before you were born. Chapter 1. The stress response was never the problem. Stress is not your enemy. It never was. The stress response, what most people call fight or flight, is one of the most elegant survival systems ever designed. Your heart rate accelerates, blood rushes to your muscles, your senses sharpen, cortisol and adrenaline flood your system to give you maximum performance in a moment of danger. For most of human history, that system saved lives. A predator appears, your body mobilizes, you run or fight, the threat passes, your nervous system returns to baseline. The whole cycle takes maybe 4 to 6 minutes. And that's the key word. Returns. The system was always designed to switch back off. Activate, respond, recover. That's the full loop. That's how it was supposed to work. The problem isn't the stress response. The problem is what happens when the off switch stops working, when the threat never fully passes, when the body stays mobilized, when low-grade activation becomes the default state and calm starts to feel foreign, even suspicious. And here's where it gets interesting. Because when that off switch breaks down long enough, the brain doesn't just get stuck in stress. It starts to want it. That's what we need to talk about next. Chapter 2. Why your brain craves stress. So how exactly does a survival system designed to protect you become something your brain craves? Most people have this completely backwards. They think stress feels bad, so they'd naturally want less of it. But that's not how the brain works. The cortisol habit loop. Every time you experience stress, your brain releases cortisol, and cortisol, despite its reputation, doesn't just feel terrible. At moderate levels, it produces something closer to a buzz, a sharpening of focus, a sense of urgency, a feeling that things matter. It makes you feel alive. And here's the critical part. The brain is a pattern recognition and reward machine. It notices what produces activation, what produces feeling, what produces the sensation of being engaged with life. And it starts to associate that cortisol buzz with being on. Over time, your brain starts to treat the absence of stress as a problem to be solved. Stillness starts to feel like something's wrong. Quiet becomes uncomfortable. Relaxation triggers a low-grade anxiety because your nervous system has recalibrated. It has set a new baseline, and that baseline is activated. So the chemistry alone is already a trap, but the chemistry is only the first layer. The identity layer. Because it doesn't stop at body chemistry, it goes all the way up into who you believe you are. Think about the language people use around their busyness. I've been absolutely slammed. I haven't had a minute to breathe. I'm running on empty. And notice, there's often a pride in that language, a signal. Being overwhelmed has become a status symbol. Being busy has become proof of importance. So now the stress isn't just a chemical habit. It's part of who you think you are. The person who's always juggling. The person who works hardest. The person who carries the most. Strip that away, and who are you? That's a question a lot of people are quietly terrified to answer. And because it's terrifying, they never slow down long enough to face it. But what happens to the rare person who finally does slow down? The withdrawal problem. Here's where it gets really uncomfortable. When chronic stress people finally do slow down, on vacation, on a quiet weekend, after a big project ends, many of them don't feel relief. They feel agitated, empty, anxious about the anxiety that isn't there. This is withdrawal, literal neurochemical withdrawal from the cortisol and adrenaline their system has been running on. And because that feeling is so uncomfortable, And because returning to busyness immediately makes it go away, the brain learns the lesson clearly. Stress equals relief from the discomfort of not being stressed. That is a closed loop. That is a full addiction cycle, and most people living inside it have no idea. Now, this loop looks different for different people, because stress addiction, just like any addiction, doesn't come in one shape. It wears disguises, and you need to be able to recognize yours. Chapter 3: The Forms It Takes in Real Life. Here's what I've noticed. Stress addiction rarely looks like what you'd imagine. It's not always the person visibly falling apart. Most of the time, it looks completely normal, even admirable. The chaos creator. This person unconsciously generates drama, not because they're a bad person, but because calm environments feel wrong to them. They stir things up in relationships, at work, in their own mind. Wherever they go, problems tend to appear. From the outside, it looks like bad luck or difficult circumstances. From the inside, it's the nervous system doing exactly what we described in Section 2, maintaining its required level of cortisol by manufacturing the threat that triggers it. The constant checker. Phone, email, news, social media, refresh, refresh, refresh. Not because there's anything important to check, but because the act of checking, with its tiny hits of novelty, urgency, and potential alarm, keeps the cortisol just high enough to feel normal. This is stress microdosing, the same loop, just in smaller doses, dozens of times a day. The deadline dependent. Can't start anything without a deadline bearing down. Produces their best work, or any work, under genuine pressure. Without urgency, nothing moves. This isn't laziness, it's a nervous system that has been trained to need crisis to activate. The off switch we talked about earlier? For this person, it's been on so long that the on switch no longer fires without an emergency. The worrier who can't stop. Everything is a potential disaster. The good news is dismissed quickly, the bad news is held, turned over, examined from every angle, prepared for. This one looks like anxiety, and it is, but there's also a function beneath it. Worry keeps the brain occupied. Worry keeps the nervous system from having to face the terrifying emptiness of being genuinely at rest. Do you see yourself in any of these? Most people see themselves in at least two. That's not a character flaw. That's the addiction doing its job, keeping you engaged, activated, and convinced that this is just who you are. But here's what's important. Once you can see the pattern, you can begin to interrupt it. The question is, how? Chapter 4: How to Break the Pattern. And I want to be honest with you here before we go into the steps. The reason most people fail to break this pattern isn't lack of information. It's that they try to fix it at the wrong level. They decide to be less stressed. They tell themselves to calm down. They take one deep breath and expect the nervous system to rewire. But we've established that this pattern lives in the body, in the chemistry, and in the identity. You have to address it at all three levels. Here's what actually moves the needle. Step 1. Learn to tolerate rest without escaping it. Remember the withdrawal we talked about? The agitation, the emptiness, the feeling that something's wrong when things go quiet? That moment, right there, is actually the most important moment in this whole process. The next time you have genuine unstructured time, no task, no screen, no podcast, don't immediately fill it. Sit with the discomfort. Notice the pull to reach for your phone. Notice the restlessness. Notice the vague feeling that you should be doing something. Don't act on it. Every time you sit through that moment instead of escaping it, you are literally retraining your nervous system's baseline. You're teaching the off switch how to work again. It will feel deeply uncomfortable at first. That discomfort is the sign that it's working. Start with 5 minutes. Build from there. Step 2. Identify your specific stress trigger loop. Go back to the 4 types. Which one fits you most? Chaos creator, constant checker, deadline dependent, compulsive worrier. Once you name your pattern, you can see the moment it activates. And seeing that moment, that tiny gap between the urge and the action, is where all the power lives. You cannot interrupt a pattern you cannot see. Watch for it. Don't try to stop it immediately. Just observe it happening. Observation alone begins to loosen the grip. And once the grip loosens, you have a choice about what comes next. Step 3. Replace the chemistry. Don't just remove it. This is where most people fail in this process, and it connects directly back to the cortisol loop. They try to eliminate stress and replace it with nothing. And the void is unbearable, because the nervous system still needs activation. It still needs to feel alive. The goal isn't to become someone who lies passively in a quiet room forever. The goal is to find clean sources of activation, things that produce energy, presence, and aliveness without the cortisol damage. Intense physical exercise, creative work that genuinely engages you, deep conversation, being in nature, anything that creates full presence. These produce real neurochemical rewards, dopamine, endorphins, serotonin, without the long-term cost. You're not escaping stimulation, you're upgrading its source. Step 4. Get honest about what the stress is protecting you from. And this is the deepest layer, the one that ties everything together. Remember the identity layer from earlier? The question we said a lot of people are terrified to answer. Strip the busyness away and who are you? This is where that question has to be answered. Chronic stress is often doing a job. It keeps you too busy to examine something you don't want to examine. It keeps you too overwhelmed to sit with a feeling you've been avoiding. It keeps you in constant motion, so the question of whether your life is actually what you want never gets space to surface. Ask yourself honestly, what would I have to face if I were no longer this busy? What would I feel if the noise went quiet? Because underneath the stress habit, in a lot of people, is grief or loneliness, or a life that hasn't gone the way they hoped, or a version of themselves they abandoned somewhere along the way. The stress isn't the problem. The stress is the avoidance strategy. Deal with what's underneath, and something remarkable happens on the other side of that work. Chapter 5. What calm actually feels like. For people who've been running on stress for years, genuine calm, when they first encounter it, doesn't feel peaceful. It feels boring. It feels slow. It feels like something is wrong. And remember, that's exactly what we described earlier. That's not you being broken. That's the withdrawal. That's the nervous system still scanning for the threat that isn't there, still expecting the cortisol that no longer comes. But stay with it, because on the other side of that discomfort, after the nervous system has had time to recalibrate, something comes back that most people have forgotten they lost. Clarity, presence, the ability to be fully in a moment without part of your brain scanning for the next threat. It feels like having your mind back. And once you've felt it, actually felt it, not just read about it, you realize what you've been trading it away for. Not for productivity, not for success, for the chemical ghost of urgency that your brain learned to mistake for being alive. You deserve better than that. Conclusion. The full picture and one question. So here's where I want to leave you. We started with a strange question. What if your brain is choosing this? And by now, I think you have your answer. The stress response was never the enemy. The off switch breaking down started the loop. The cortisol buzz made it feel good. The identity layer made it feel like you. The withdrawal made stopping feel impossible. And underneath all of it, something worth finally looking at. That's the whole picture. And the first step back isn't a system or a schedule. It's one question to carry with you today. Is my stress something that's happening to me, or something my brain has learned to recreate? If there's even a chance the answer is the second one, you already know where to start. 5 minutes, no phone, no task, just you and the discomfort of stillness. That noticing is where the whole thing begins to unravel. Pause. Breathe. Reset. Your mind deserves better, and you deserve peace. If this opens something up for you, subscribe. I make videos like this every week. Drop a comment with which of the 4 stress patterns you recognized most in yourself. I read all of them. See you in the next video.